So today we're coming out of the time of what they call the Pentateuch, or the Torah, or the Law. All three words mean the same thing. They're the first 5 books of Genesis. The Law is English, Torah is Hebrew, Pentateuch is Greek. So they're all talking about the first 5 books. Penta means 5. So that's why it's Pentateuch. Torah is law in Hebrew. And of course we would call it the law or the books of Moses or anything like that. So we're leaving that section and moving on to the next section. So if you remember the very first day when I gave you the chart, we are at Joshua moving forward.
Do Jews read the remainder, or do they only read the Pentateuch?
Well, at the time of Christ, the reason I'm going to say it this way is that if you were a Sadducee, you only read the Torah.
Okay.
If you read anything else, that was just like good advice or whatever, but that wasn't the Word of God. If you were a Pharisee, you read all of it. So there's that. Now today, I'm thinking they read all of it, but they end at Malachi and do not move on unless they're Messianic Jew.
Right.
And then they would read the New Testament also.
But they consider the Moses books the most.
Moses books are the most, if they were to evaluate it, Moses is on the pinnacle. Okay? So we're moving from Joshua on. This is the history of Israel. And at this point, the books and the order and what's going on and the people involved get more complicated. Just as so in our English Bibles, because it runs in order for a while, and then this book is slipped in, and this book is slipped in, and that, so I thought I'd have the chart here. There's also some overlapping of people that you don't necessarily see unless you start to really dig into the time. And so I always find that fascinating, so I have to do that. And since you guys are stuck with me, you have to see it. So we're going to start with Joshua. And the book of Joshua takes place right here. It's about a 25-year book. It takes about 25 years to conquer. Actually, it takes about 5 years to conquer the land. It takes about 25 years to finish this book. So it goes from maybe 1400 to 1375. Okay, so it's really a short one. The book of Judges does that. Just thought I'd show you the difference between the time frame between Joshua and Judges ends here. This one right here is 1 Samuel. This one right here is 2 Samuel. And that starts 1 Kings. Okay, now that's the main storyline. But the main storyline, we go Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So take Ruth out for the moment and go Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then on that way. Chronicles, just to throw you off, is going to fit 1st Chronicles is at the same time as 2nd Samuel. Okay? And 2nd Chronicles covers 1st and 2nd Kings. Just showing you that, so when you're reading it and you get to the end of 2nd Kings and you have just realized that they've been taken away into captivity, and then all of a sudden you open up the very next book and we're at David. Okay? It's not a chronological order book. So once you get to the end of 2nd Kings, you are at the exile, which is a big breaking point in the history. And so you have 2nd Chronicles comes next. And they do not, in Jewish Bibles, 1st and 2nd Chronicles is the very, very last book of their Bible. It's not Malachi. It's 2nd Chronicles. So if you have the Jewish construction of the Old Testament, it's in different order than we have. And I won't like try to confuse you with that because I barely can remember it myself. But they divide their Bible into three things. One's Torah, one's the Nahim, and the Kethubi. Anyway, it ends up being a T, an N, and a K, first three letters, and they call it Tanakh. So if you ever hear anybody mentioning the Tanakh, they're talking about the Jewish Old Testament. And it's in three sections. But I'm not ready to teach. I didn't even, this is long-term memory right now. So. Okay, so with Joshua, so we're going to start here. Let's see, what else was I going to tell you? Oh, I'm going to put Psalms here. And maybe in 1 Samuel too. Psalms is at least 50% written by David. So this is a good place to put the location, would be under David. This is going to be our David story. Okay, Solomon is in 1 Kings. So and I'll get the people up there in a minute. You got the people on the chart. So I'm trying to orient you to the way it all lays out, so that when you read through, if you read from start to finish, you're going to go back. You got to know when you are doing backstory, okay? And you're going back and catching up. All right, so there's that. Proverbs probably fits in right here with 1 Kings and Song of Solomon and Ecclesiastes. Okay, so, and then we had Job way, way, way back there, remember? So that covers your, most of your books of history, except for the after the exile. And this is your books of wisdom, books of poetry, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Okay?
Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes, are they all written by Solomon?
That's pretty much what they think. There is at least one song written by Moses, so that's going way back. There are songs written by Asaph and by the sons of Korah and by different kings. Just for a really fun thing while I'm way off track again on Psalms, you guys remember when the earth opened up and swallowed the guys? And Korah, his sons were the only ones who didn't join the group, and they did not get killed off. Well, one of the things that the father Korah wanted to do was to burn incense inside the tabernacle, right? And so if you go into 1 Chronicles, you will find out that the line of Korah was, one of their jobs was to be the gatekeepers. And that was obviously not cool enough for Korah. He wanted to go inside, and there's a psalm written by the sons of Korah. And one of the verses says, "I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my Lord than to dwell in the tents of evil." And the whole thing just like, oh my goodness, when I finally put it together, the sons of Korah and the story of Korah and what Korah was supposed to do and what they said they wanted to do, it just made that verse mean a lot to me. I'd rather take a lower position and serve my Lord than to do the wrong thing. And I just loved it, because up until then, I read through that and I go, oh great, I'd rather be a doorkeeper. You know, I didn't get the point, you know.
Where is that?
That is Psalm 84, verse 10. So that's just a side note. I'm off on a rabbit trail already. sort of how I
So
go.
they sort of are redeemed in their thinking from what their ancestors.
Right. So they're like, okay, we learned the lesson there, or
And
they're
they really did.
Yeah, they really did learn the lesson. Yeah, so that's really cool. So we are on Joshua. Joshua opens up with his commission. And you guys, I gotta kind of tell the story quickly. So he opened, but his commission is wonderful. God says, I will be with you. I will stand by you. I will go with you. Do not be afraid of them. I will go with you. And that's wonderful for him because if you remember Moses, I would not want to be Moses, but I also would not want to step into the position of Moses. Those are big shoes to fill. And here's Joshua, and he's a big, strong guy and all that, but even still, and he's watched. He's one of the ones that was the spy that said, one of the two spies that said, let's go conquer. So he knows this incredibly rebellious people. And yet now he has to lead them. I'm going, oh, not a position to be envied, you know? And so, but God meets him right away. I mean, very first chapter. And says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the enemy. I will be with you. I will help you. It's wonderful. So the story goes, you know, the very first thing that happens is the spies into Jericho and meeting Rahab. There was one thing I thought was really interesting that she said right at the very beginning, because one of the things that people talk about is why does God just go and randomly wipe out this people? You know, that's an argument I've heard about the cruelty of God. He just randomly wipes out this people. Well, he used those 40 years in the wilderness. You know how God uses bad things for good? He used those 40 years to evangelize Canaan. And how do we know that? Rahab knew. Rahab's she's a prostitute, but she's just a nobody type person in this big city, and she knows what the God of Israel has done. She knows all about Egypt. She knows all about Pharaoh. She knows about how he wiped out their gods. She even knows how they wiped out Sihon and Og, the two people on the east side. Whoops, over here. She knows all this, and she knows that God is really God. And she believes. And so if she knows, the rest of the city knows. And she's the one who chose to believe. And I thought, isn't that cool that even when judgment comes, there's opportunity of mercy coming, you know? There, she knew. And that really hit me about Rahab. Well, you know the story, and she gets saved, and you know, they march around, talk about Joshua receiving his first military orders with what was considered at that time to be the strongest, most fortified city in existence. And that's Jericho. Jericho had walls, and double walls. They found double rows of walls. She probably lived on the outside wall in between the inside important part, you know, and she's out in the other part. And his job is to do the most non-correct military strategy possible. And that is to show your entire force to the enemy and walk around their building, show off everything you've got, no secrets, no nothing, and just walk around and leave. And he has nobody on his, let's say he's walking around clockwise. There's no protection of his flank. There's nothing in front, there's nothing, and he's exposing himself. There's no element of surprise. These are all the military things. There's no element of surprise, there's no nothing, right? And so these are his instructions, and right before it happens, in chapter 5, the angel of the Lord stands in front of Joshua. He's out on the road in front of Jericho. This hasn't started yet, day one hasn't started. He meets this military person called the angel of the Lord. When you see the angel of the Lord and you want to know, is this an angel or is this the Lord? You can tell by the reaction of the person. If they bow down and worship, it's got to be God, because if it's an angel, the angel is required to tell them not to worship them. That happens in Revelation twice. John tries to worship the angel, and the angel stops him. So if the angel does not stop him, that is not, quote, an angel. That is the Lord. And so he has to take his shoes off. He's on holy ground, and he worships this guy. And the guy says, it's like God tells Joshua, I'm the commander, I got this. And so that's so cool. Be second in charge and not first in charge. That is so cool. I actually love the position of second in charge. rather than first in charge. And so Joshua's great, and he goes for it, and you know the story, Jericho falls. One of the things with Jericho was that it's the first, well, they had already crossed the Jordan. That's a huge story in itself. But one of the things with Jericho is that everything inside was Corban. Corban means that it is of great value, but you cannot take it. Everything inside was for the Lord only. So if they found gold, if they found robes, clothes were very, very valuable back then. They're not like clothes we have now. Each one of us probably has a dozen or more outfits in our closet somewhere. They had one, maybe two. They had, if you had 3 or 4 outfits, you were extremely wealthy. So if they found robes that were hand done from Egypt, or they found robes from different fancy, but that was of a lot of value. They weren't to take any of that. Every single thing that was in Jericho, everything that they could find that was booty, was to the Lord. It was like first fruits. Okay? After that, they got to take the stuff. All the other cities, but not this one. Well, one guy does, and he hides it under his tent, and nobody knows it. Okay, so now they're ready to go to Ai, which is the next one. And they had so much success at Jericho, they take a small force, like maybe only 10,000, to Ai, and Ai is not as strong as Jericho, and Ai is not as big as Jericho, and Ai doesn't have as strong an army as Jericho, and they get wiped out. They get wiped out, and they come back, and Joshua's, what happened, Lord? And then they find out that there's sin in the camp. And so they had to go discover the sin in the camp. They used the Urim and the Thummim, and that's the breastplate on the high priest, and it lights up miraculously as to which tribe, and it has the yes and no, and they figure out exactly which man it is, and they see, and he has to die. And his family stands with him. They want the stuff. So after that, then they get over all that, then there's another battle, and they go back to Ai, and this time they have this very wonderful battle that just fascinates the daylights out of me, but I can't take the time to tell you the strategy of this battle, but this is my favorite battle in the Bible. So they win Ai, and Bethel comes over, so they've got, and here's their strategy. They are, there's a little place right here called Gilgal. It's right close to the Jordan River, and it's not quite in as far as Jericho. And their strategy is to cut west. It's like divide and conquer. So they are going to go through like this and get a footing this way. Now they have a supply line. So if they go down to the south, they have a supply line because they have already conquered this territory. And that's very, very important in military strategy. So this is amazingly basic study that if you were in the military, you might even study this pattern. You divide and conquer. So you set a thing, they go from Jericho to Ai to Bethel. They're going to do Bethshean next. And they conquer those. And then Moses had told them, this was important, Moses had told them that when they get into the land, and Moses has never been in the land, but he identifies a valley and 2 mountains. Exactly, and by their names. He goes, you go there, you go to that valley, and you have half of your people stand on Mount Ebal, and half of your people stand on Mount Gerizim, and they entirely, and the ark is in the middle, and the priests are in the middle, and they go over the covenant. And he tells them which tribes are going to stand up here, which tribes are going to stand up here, and this tribe yells out, if you don't obey, blah, blah, this is going to happen. If you do obey, this is going to happen. And they go back and forth. And they go back and they go through the curses and blessings of Deuteronomy 28. And they go back and forth and back and forth. And then he writes it all down on a big stone and puts it in the valley. We didn't get to go there. That valley is Palestinian territory right now, and we didn't get to go there, but that would have been a cool thing to see Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and to see the valley. And obviously it's got an echo effect, you know? It's really cool. So the people have what? They've reviewed the covenant.
They knew it.
Now they know it. I mean, this is the next generation. They're conquering. They know it. Right after that, they go back to their camp, and the Gibeonites. You guys remember the Gibeonites? They sneak in from the backside and pretend that they're from far away and make this covenant. And they're not supposed to, but that's that covenant I told you about from the very many weeks ago that was made that they weren't supposed to make. Yes, they didn't ask the Lord. So now Israel is now suzerain over the vassal of, it's not on here, it's right here. It's the next city on the list in their strategy. Okay, so when they are now are responsible for their safety. Okay, so all these guys down here, all these guys in Hebron and Debar, I can't remember exactly which ones, they hear that their used to be partner, military partner, has now sided with the enemy, which is treason to them, and they bring up all the forces together. So instead of conquering one nation at a time, Israel has to fight all of them at a time. And they come sending a runner back to Gilgal, and by the time the runner gets back to Gilgal saying they're attacking us, it's night. So the army has to march uphill all night long. They arrive at dawn. That's not a rested army. And that's when the attack takes place. Well, you guys have heard about the hail that came down, the big, huge hail. The hail that comes down, that's like baseballs, and it wipes out this is all very close hand-to-hand combat. You know, it's not like, probably the biggest distance is an arrow. It's not like combat we know about now. This is very up front and close. And the hail comes down and it hits only the enemy. It doesn't hit any Israelites. God has a really good aim. You could be standing this close with a knife and he gets hit and I don't. And I just love it. And so they get to the end of the battle. So now they're at the end of the day, which means they've been up for a day and a half now, you know, and and the battle's not done. The battle's not done, and Joshua goes, no, we can't quit. They're going to run off, and then we're going to have to go chase them all over the place. And so we got to finish this battle right now. So he stands there and he goes, God, stop the sun. Talk about a brave prayer. I have never had the courage to ask God to stop the sun. I really haven't. And he does. And the earth stops rotating for 24 hours. And gravity isn't destroyed. You know, the Earth's rotation is what produces the gravity, and gravity is not destroyed. I haven't substantiated this, and I've heard other people say, no, that's not true. But one time I was looking at NASA, and one of the Christian guys on NASA said that they can tell how the rotations of everything go in space, and there is a lost 24 and 6 hours. 6 hours is later that they cannot accommodate for somewhere in this massive star. How they study that, I have no clue. Whether that's actually been substantiated by anybody else, I do not know. But I thought, I wouldn't be surprised. You know, but don't take that as, anything. So I thought that was really, really cool. So they win the battle, they have to go back and capture all the kings because they take off and they pull them all back, and there's all kinds of details there. And now they have cut through the center. Evidently, there's not much right here at the moment. They've conquered the south, and there's a little bit of time. And these guys up here say, okay, we are stronger than them. We're going to pull all of us together against them. So now the third part of the strategy is to go to the north, and they have chariots uncountable. They have horses. This means they have the most vast army possible. And Israelites just have men on foot. The difference is unreal. It would, you enter battle more evenly distributed than that. But, God says to Joshua, don't you worry. We're going to win. I'm going to fight the battle for you. And it's the king of Hezbon. I lost it there for a second. Anyway, he gets all of them. They all attack at once. This innumerable amount, and of course Israel wins. So that puts us through the battlefield time of Joshua. That gets us halfway through the book. So the first half of the book is all the battles of conquering the land. You should know that when they conquered the land, they conquered the kings of each of these things and their armies. They didn't necessarily kill all the people that were maybe had a Bethab out in the hills, or had their families were scattered and didn't live in the city. So there are remaining people all over the place. But the armies are defeated and the powers are defeated. That makes sense?
My Bible says the very last line in 11, Joshua 11, then the land had rest from war.
Yes, the land has rest. So that takes all about 5 years to do all that part. And then the next part of Joshua is to divide up the land. So now they start giving out who gets their inheritance. This is their land. This is the covenant to Abraham being fulfilled. Who gets what land? So 12 to 21, 22, somewhere in there, is dividing up the land. So Judah gets this right here. And Simeon is incorporated in the middle of Judah. Benjamin is right here. Dan is right there. Ephraim, right here. Manasseh gets this big section. Manasseh is a big tribe. They get half of them here. It's called the half tribe of Manasseh up here, and the half tribe of Manasseh down here. They get Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, Reuben and Gad are over here. And the Levites, there's a whole chapter on where do they go. They all have like 2 cities to live, or 2 or 3 cities to live in here. The smaller ones, they'll have a city, so that they are distributed amongst the cities around, which means they have teachers and people who can teach Torah to them in every location. That's what that is for. They get to live in those cities. So that's that. And then we're at the end of Joshua. And Joshua is getting old. And I thought I'd read some of this to you. And so turn to Joshua. Did I race through that fast enough for you? You have any questions?
Here's why Dan is separated. Dan has 2 first.
Oh, that's a question that's good. This is their land, which they don't conquer. They don't get rid of the peoples with their idols. And they like that one. So they send somebody up there later to get that one. Yeah. Okay, so, at the end of 21, here's a great verse. I love this. The very last verse of chapter 21, before Joshua starts doing his farewell speech, his last words. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made failed. All came to pass. I always thought that was really, this was a huge promise. I'm going to give you this land, and somebody else was in that land. but not one of the good promises of the Lord gave failed. Okay, so Joshua is going to give his last words. He is now dying. He's going to say, I'm in chapter 23, be very firm then, verse 6. Be very firm then to keep all and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it from the right hand or to the left, in order that you may not associate with these nations, which remain among you. See, there's still people among them. That each tribe is supposed to conquer their section. So they're supposed to eliminate what's left in their territory. Each tribe is supposed to do that. We're going to find out, I'm interrupting already. We're going to find out later that only Judah does that. Judah and Simeon are the only ones who get rid of the rest of the people. And even that doesn't last long. In order that you may not associate with these nations which remain among you, or make mention of the name of their gods, or make anyone swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them, but you are to cling to the Lord your God as you have done to this day. So, go down to 14. Now behold, today I am going the way of all earth, and you know in your hearts and in your souls that not one of all the good words which the Lord your God spoke concerning you has failed. All have been fulfilled, for not one of them has failed. It's important for them to remember. Okay, so I love chapter 24. You probably have a verse of chapter 24 on the wall of your house. A lot of people do. Okay, so go down to, he has a long time. He also reviews the story. He's going to say, this is your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Oh, by the way, if you are in that, I'm going to have all these rabbit trails. If you are reading the Old Testament through from beginning to end, here's the challenge. See how often God brings up, I brought you up from the land of Egypt. It's like it's on every other page. I'm the God who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Remember? That's our God who brought us up from the land. It's all over the place. That was the big event. It is everywhere. And that is the beginning of the covenant of the suzerain to his people. I am the God who brought you up out of the land. It's going to be all over the place. So Joshua goes over all that again. Here's interesting. Look at verse 14. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods. My thought was, what? Do they already? Wait a minute. No, don't let me believe that. They already have gods that need to be put away?
So easily swayed.
Yes. Which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and served the Lord. So you can tell that they were raised to believe in the gods of Egypt, which is probably why they built a golden calf. If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourself today whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served and which were beyond the river. Beyond the river means beyond the Euphrates River, going back to Ur with Abraham before he was called, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living now. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So that is like such a statement of Joshua, and I love that it's in our houses all over the place. I love that. And the people say, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord and serve other gods. For the Lord our God is he who brought us and our fathers out of the land of Egypt, and who brought us out of the land down the house of bondage, and who did these great signs in our sight, and preserved us through all this way. And the Lord drove us out. I'm kind of skipping ahead. We will also serve the Lord, for he is our God. Now, verse 19. Then Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to do that. You will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God, and he is a jealous God, and he will not forgive your sins or your transgressions. That is not a statement of God does not forgive sins and transgressions. That's a statement of If you as the people stop obeying your suzerain, he's got to punish you. That's what that is. And he will not just let it slide. Okay? This is their covenant. They cannot just let it. Would be like saying, oh, I can go steal because God will forgive me. You think that our judiciary system would just let it slide? That's what this is. You can't do that. Okay? If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm, and consume you after he has done good to you. Then the people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve the Lord. Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourself, that you have chosen for yourselves the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. They just swore on the Bible. You get that? Now therefore, put away the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. The people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God, and we will obey his voice. And so Joshua made a covenant with them that day, and they made a statute and ordinance in Shechem. Shechem is the place between the two mountains. So, you see what they've done? Okay, skip forward to Judges. So Joshua dies, and the first people who are alive at the time. See, Joshua is one of the oldest ones, because he's one of the ones who came out of Egypt at 20. So there's this whole generation of younger ones that did all the fighting. Well, they saw it all. So they stay faithful. That whole next generation stays faithful. The generation after that, not so much. So let's see where I'm at here. I think we're on chapter 2, verse 10. See, I knew I was going to have a hard time getting through it all. All that generation who were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which the Lord had done. And the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord their God, and brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods from among the people who were around them, and they bowed themselves down to them. Thus they provoked the Lord. So they forsook the Lord and served the Baal. And the anger of the Lord turned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of plunderers who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had spoken, and as God, the Lord had sworn to them, so they were severely distressed. Then the Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they played the harlot after other gods and bowed themselves down to them. They turned aside quickly from the way in which their fathers had walked, obeying the command, and they did not do as their fathers did. So it goes on, and it's describing a cycle. So I thought I'd show you the cycle. Chapter 2 and actually describes this cycle. Okay, so it's guys. See if I get all this right. They start off serving the Lord. I was going to put this on there, on your thing, and then after I had it all done, I realized I'd forgotten. So I'm sorry. The circle. Then they go to sin and idolatry. It's going to go this way. And then they're going to be oppressed. and become slaves of whoever it is that is conquering this time. And then they're going to cry out to the Lord. And then the Lord's going to raise up a judge. We call it a judge. It's really more like a military commander. That's who it is. They call it a judge. And he will deliver them. And that will last for a little while. And then they'll serve the Lord. And then they'll fall into sin and idolatry. And then they'll be oppressed as slaves. And then they'll cry out to the Lord. And then the Lord will provide. And they'll be delivered. And they'll serve for a while. And then they'll do this. This repeats. There are 12 judges. This repeats. I've heard it said at least 7 times. Because some of them are going on at the same time in different locations. But there are 12 judges, so there's 12 cycles, although they may overlap. Okay? It's going to go on and on and on. And in there we're going to have Othniel. It's the first one. I gave you a list. You have to look at the list. And then there's Ehud. Ehud's a fun story. It has to do with a great big fat man and a left-handed guy and a sword hidden on the wrong side of his body and sneaking into the bathroom and all kinds of cool things. You know? So there's that. There's Shamgar. Deborah and Barak is a pretty good story. There's Gideon. You guys have heard of him. And Tola and Jair. They're barely mentioned, so I don't have much of a story on them. Jephthah is an interesting one. Isban and Elon and Abdon, I don't have a lot of information. There's not hardly anything on them. And then there's Samson. So I thought I'd show you about something about Samson because that's the end of the book. Oh, and then it's going to have, in the middle of this judge's time, that's from here to here, Ruth is going to take place. I kind of think she takes place closer to this end. This is just my opinion because her son is, remind me of his name, Ruth's son, Obed. Obed is David's grandfather. So Obed can't be born back here and be David's grandfather, because David's over here. So she's near the end. And as the cycles go, like this, so here's your cycles. They're going to go like this, through Judges. Each one gets progressively worse. So it's not like they go all the way back to neutral. So the first cycle is the least severe. The last cycle is going to be the most severe. The last cycle is Samson. And actually, Samuel is the last judge, but his story is in the book of Samuel, not in the book of Judges. So, in the middle of this, we get to the last 5 chapters of Judges. And the last 5 chapters of Judges tell 5 backstories. Okay, so when you get to Samuel, you've got 5 more chapters to go. When you get to Samson, you have 5 more chapters to go. Those 5 chapters are backstories in here somewhere. They're not continuous stories. They're telling you what happened. They're awful. They're awful. Don't read them to your kids. They're not good stories. They're just really awful stories. They kind of make Sodom and Gomorrah look not so serious as to this. So they're pretty darn bad, and we won't go into that because we got to move on. But I'm telling you, it gives you an idea of what life was like. And whereas this gives you the big overall picture, those 5 stories tell you what it's like within the individual obs of the places. And it's not good. At the same time, Ruth is in here. in there. Ruth is a wonderful story. And each one of these is actually a story of redemption. Do you see? We get ourselves in sin and idolatry. And our idolatry doesn't look like little statues that we bow down to, but we have our own idolatries all over the place. And we become, look at our culture. Are we addicted to it? Are we slaves to it? And hopefully some of us cry out to the Lord, and the Lord provides a solution, and we get. So this is a picture of redemption. Over and over and over and over and over again. And right here we have Ruth with our kinsman redeemer, and it's all done on personal stories. So there's hope through it all. There's all kinds of awful, there's all kinds of hope. So as our country gets awful, we have opportunities for Ruths everywhere. Ruth stories. Be a Ruth story amongst the awful, and see what that does. And that little story is carried through, one of the most wonderful ones in the whole Bible, that little story of Ruth. So that's really cool. Okay, I want to show you one thing and then we'll take the break. I showed it on there. The book of Samuel starts here, but Samuel is born about here. Samuel is born during Samson. Now Samson wasn't born then, that's when his 20 years were, when he was judge. But Samuel's born here. So that means that when Samson's doing his thing, Hannah's there at the tabernacle praying to God for a baby. And Samuel is born, and Samson is the judge, and he's doing his thing, and maybe he's out pushing the walls down or fighting with the foxes when he lights their tails on fire and all that stuff, or doing all the stuff he did with. Samuel's listening to God's voice in his bed in the middle of the night, and he's serving in the tabernacle. I just wanted it put the story together for me to realize that both things were happening at the same time. And the tabernacle is in Shiloh at the moment, and Shiloh is somewhere in this area. And, Samuel is born, and who else is on the chart right now? Oh, Saul is born right now.
Yeah.
So Saul is the kid growing up. So you wouldn't hardly pick up on the fact that that's overlapping stories there, but that's what it is. All right. We'll start in with 1 Samuel after the break. So at the beginning of 1 Samuel, there's a story about this battle. And Eli is the priest, and Hophni and Phinehas are his sons. Eli's the high priest, and it's not the same Phinehas that was 400 years earlier, because we are now into this timeline. We're about 1100 BC. Phinehas that did the thing that got the covenant when he, stopped the rebellion with Baal Peor was way back here. So it's not the same guy. But anyway, the sons are Hophni and Phinehas. They're not very good priests. They sort of defile the tabernacle constantly with their lady friends inside the tabernacle.
Wow.
And this is where Samuel grows up. And this is where Hannah, with tremendous faith, left her son to serve the Lord. And I have to just totally respect, with high degree, the faith of Hannah to do such a thing. And the fact that Samuel turns out, if I stumble over Samson and Samuel and Saul, it's because they're all in my brain, so forgive me for that. But Samuel turns out to be a really strong believer in God. So, but there's this battle. He's not quite head over anything yet. Hophni and Phinehas are still there, but the Philistines have attacked. Now, one thing you should know, about 1200 BC, we're about here, so about 100 years earlier, there was a big upheaval in Greece, in the area of Greece. And they had to send out some Mycenaean people, I'm pretty sure. They had to send out, they had to leave, like refugees. Thousands and thousands and thousands of refugees left Greece and headed, I have the right direction, is that east? Headed east to the coast of Palestine area. And they are called the Greek Sea Peoples, and they settled the coast, and we end up knowing them as the Philistines. Now, there were some Philistines a lot earlier, but this is when the mass of Philistines came. And Palestine gets its name from the Philistines. So that's the connection between those two names. So the Philistines are all over the coast, and they are moving. They are all in here, and they are moving this way. The Israelites are mostly up in here. The vast majority of the population are in the hill country up here, and they are moving that way. So there's this conflict, all right? And there's this big war that goes on, and Israel's sure they're going to win, and they lose terribly. So the Philistines are winning, and Israel's losing, and so they get the idea, let's go get the ark. So they go back to Shiloh, they get the ark, they carry the ark into battle, and at first the Philistines are terrified because if you brought your God, meaning they're looking at this as an idol, just let you know, the Philistines are looking at the ark as the idol of our God, of Israel's God. And you bring your idol into battle, then the other army's going to lose. Whichever God has their idol, whichever army has their idol there is going to be the winning army. So they didn't have their God there, so they thought they're going to lose. So they're afraid, and then but their leaders of their commanders and whatnot said, "No, you be strong. You go attack them anyway. We can beat that idol." So they do, and they capture the ark, and they take it to Ashkelon. Now, about 25 years earlier, approximately, or maybe even less than that, Samson has been tied up and put inside the temple of Dagon in, by the way, Gaza. Right there. Okay? And when he is in the temple of Dagon, Dagon is the fish god, and they are the Greek sea peoples. See, so you see the whole connection there between their fish god and their sea peoples. And of course, Samson knocks it down and destroys the temple at Gaza. Well, Gaza doesn't have it. Maybe they rebuilt it by now. They take the ark to Ashdod, which is right, or Ashkelon, one of these two. I can't remember exactly. They take him into one of theirs. So they put the Ark of the Covenant in front of another idol of Dagon inside that temple. And so here's Dagon, and here's the ark. And they get up the next morning, and Dagon is bowing down, has fallen over, and is bowing down to the ark. I love this. I love teaching this story to kids. I just think this is the best, that they get all excited about this. So they go, "Oh man, what happened here?" So they lift up their Dagon, and they the next night, not only does he fall down again, this time his head comes off and both hands fall off. He's broken. So, and there's God sitting there in the ark, right? So, so then they start breaking out with sores. Really bad tumors, like they have bubonic plague. And they think might have even been bubonic plague because there's a lot of rats that come up through the whole thing. And the reason we know that is because after 9 months or so, the Philistines decide, hey, we're all dying here. We gotta get this ark out of our territory. We do not want this God in our territory. And they believed back then that gods ruled territories. So Dagon would rule that territory. This God rules this territory. So they kind of believed that gods ruled territories. They didn't believe that one God was God. Okay, that's how the other countries around believe. So they just have to get that Ark of the Covenant out of their territory. So they send it out. They put it on a cart. They put 2 cows there, and they go. And somebody goes, "How can we know this is really anything?" And one of the priests of Dagon says, or somebody says, "If he takes the road that takes him straight back, we'll know that that's really the God of Israel. If those cows that are not they're milk cows, by the way, they're not trained cows that are like used to hauling a cart or anything like these are like the cows you never pick for this job. And if they just wander all over, then we'll know it's no big deal. But if it goes straight back, we'll know that's really the God of Israel." And guess what happened? They go straight back. Yeah. But they have to give an offering back to the God of Israel. You know what they give? They give gold things of the tumors and the rats. So they make these shapes that look like the tumors and the rats, and they put them in, and they send it back. Okay, so in the midst of this, before the ark goes back, I kind of lost my story there from that. I do that a lot. When the battle is first lost and the ark is first captured, a runner goes back and tells Eli at Shiloh what happened, because Hophni and Phinehas both die in that battle. And so by this time, Eli's like 98 years old. He's blind. He's rather heavy. He's sitting on a rock or a bench or something. And the runner comes in and, he's all out of breath. And he tells the story to Eli that the ark has been taken, the ark is captured, and his sons have died. And Eli falls over and dies. Okay, at the same time, one of those sons' wives is giving birth. So she is giving birth to what would be the grandson of Eli. And she hears that her husband has died, her father-in-law has died, and her uncle has died, which means her Ben-Ob is gone, right? And she is dying in childbirth. And she names her son, this is terrible when my mind goes blank. I know this word. Who knows it? What's she name her son? Ichabod. You know what Ichabod means? No glory. The glory has left Israel. Kavod is glory. Ichabod is no glory. So the glory has left Israel. This is a big thing. So it's this story about the tumors and the rats and the gold and Dagon falling all down. The real story is that the glory has left Israel. That's not a good sign. So since it's important to know when the glory came in, the glory is now gone. And that is that part of that story right there. Well, okay. So when the ark gets back, they have to in the meantime, there's archaeology tells us, not the Bible, archaeology tells us that there's signs that the place where the tabernacle was, see, I'm losing all my words, I've got too many in my head. Shiloh has been destroyed. So they've had to rescue the rest of the tabernacle out of Shiloh, which they have, and they cannot take the ark back to Shiloh. So even though the Philistines have sent the ark back, there's no place for it. So it stays in another guy's house, Kiriath Jearim, and it's there for over 20 years. And it just is there. And I think that's the home of a Levite, so there's a little bit of okay going on there, but you might have to check the details on that one, because I've got 400 years in my head trying to get out for you, and it's jumbling. Okay, so In the middle of this, they've just lost to the Philistines. Philistines are coming in, and it's Saul and the people decide they want a king. And they want a king. Now this is really interesting because they want a king for a standing army. That's what they want. They want to be like the other nations. That's not good. And they want a king for a standing army. Did anybody remember in Deuteronomy when God gave Moses the instructions for a king? These were the instructions. 1, don't collect horses. Horses means don't collect horses and chariots. Don't have a standing army. 2, don't marry lots of wives. They married lots of wives, not just to get lots of wives. They married lots of wives to make alliances with other nations. This was the treaty. You take that person's daughter, you marry them, you have a treaty with that nation. That even happened in Europe. Some of the young ladies of England married the Prince of Portugal or whatever, and that creates a treaty. And so Solomon, as we go forward, is going to have 1,000 treaties. So don't make treaties with other nations, don't have a standing army, and don't go after the gold. Don't build up a huge treasury. So the first thing that the people want is a standing army and to be like the other nations. So they didn't mention the gold, but you can see that they're already asking for a king for the wrong reason. But God didn't say you couldn't have a king. God said you just have to have a king the right way, because he has instructions for having a king in Deuteronomy, which is really important moving forward, because we're going to get into the kings. And so it's Saul, and he gets anointed, and he becomes king. He is not God's choice for king so much as he's the people's choice for king, and God says, okay. When they say, we want a king, Samuel goes, no, don't do that. He's very upset. And God says, you're going to have to listen to him and let him have a king. We're going to let this one go. He's going to do this. And he goes, but you're going to give them a warning. They're going to tax you. They've never been taxed before. They're going to conscript your sons into the army. They've never had to do that. They're going to take your daughters and make them work in your bakeries and in your things and here and there. They've never done that. They're going to be your rulers and your... See, what happened before is these were Confederate-like tribes. The government for Naphtali was in Naphtali. Period. The government for Ephraim was in Ephraim. The ruling, whatever. They made their own. They functioned as a tribal community like that. Manasseh never told Dan what to do. Judah was never in charge of anybody. See? So now all of a sudden we're consolidating everything and turning it into a kingdom with a king. And the rule for Deuteronomy was when you have a king, yes, he's going to consolidate these people, but he is only sub-king to king. God is king, and he is sub-king. That's why he has to take a copy of the scroll, copy it, and read it all the days of his life. He has to write it himself in front of the Levites to make sure he gets every word right. So can you imagine sitting in front of somebody and copying Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy? Okay? It's a big thing. And he's supposed to do that. So the issues that's going to come up is, does the king think he's king? Or does the king think he's king under God? Okay? It's a huge difference. Because King Saul is going to think he's king. And he's not going to remember that God's here. King David, as much as he did awful things, he never forgets he's under the king. That's the huge difference between Saul and that's why God gave the covenant to David, which I want to get to before we run out of time today. Because he never, ever stopped letting his heart be towards the obedience to God, even though he sinned and made lots of bad decisions. So Saul did the difference. So a battle comes up, and there's more than one that the battle comes up, and he's supposed to go destroy the Amalekites. You guys remember who the Amalekites are? Moses' arms up. Those are the Amalekites. They were the ones who attacked from the rear when the people were just leaving Egypt. Amalekites are a descendant of Esau, and they are particularly hard and callous and difficult. And so Saul's supposed to go wipe out the Amalekites. He wipes out everything except he brings the king back as a trophy, and he brings back all their best cattle. And God said, through Samuel, told him, you don't bring anything back. Nothing is left alive. Not their cattle, not the king, not anything. Okay? So he doesn't do that. And he goes, no, but we were going to sacrifice these animals to the Lord. So Saul rewrote the rules. He loses the kingdom for that. He loses his dynasty for that. That is, and you would have to stop and you think, wait a minute, David's going to commit adultery and murder. And he's not going to lose the kingdom. All Saul does is not kill the animals, and it doesn't make sense until you evaluate what's going on in their heads. And so Saul is not keeping God as his suzerain. He has made himself that, said, I will now sacrifice to you. So Samuel says these amazing words that obedience, and let's see, where is it at? It's in maybe 13? 1 Samuel 13 or 14? I don't know if that's the right place or not.
The rash oath,
Yeah, he says,
14:24,
maybe, yeah. But there's a verse that actually says that it is better to obey than to sacrifice.
oh yeah.
And that's what, so Saul now loses his dynasty. Now if you stop and think about it, you know who Saul's son is? Jonathan, which means the crown prince is not going to become king. You would think the crown prince is going to have a lot of animosity toward the man who does become king, which is David, which is an amazing thing, is why it says that there's such a friendship between us, because you have to give so much credit to Jonathan for that. And we'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, so in the midst of this, this is the story of First Samuel. It's about halfway through. By the time we get to chapter 16, King Saul has lost his dynasty, and God is now directly choosing a king. Nobody else is saying, hey, God, we need a new king. This is God's decision, and he goes, and this is when he has Samuel go and like David. David's story starts in chapter 16. And so he goes there, and you know the story. He's the kid nobody thought of. He's the guy Dad didn't even remember. He's out in the fields taking care of the sheep, and it turns into, oh, I want to tell you this. Totally off subject. My grandson, when he was 4 years old, loved to play David and Goliath. Just loved it. And he'd put the robe on, and he'd have his little sling or his pool noodle for his sword or whatever, and he would just chase around my garage. My garage has all kinds of stuff in it, so you can chase all around. And he would kill giants everywhere. And he'd and what you do? I kill them all, you know, whatever, you know. And so one day he comes upstairs, and he's all dressed up in his thing, and I go, what happened, David? Goliath won. Why did Goliath win? I forgot to pray.
Wow.
Yeah. One of my favorite memories of my So there's my David and Goliath story. And it was, I'm acting it out like I saw it. It was very dramatic. And, so he forgot to pray, and He lost. Well, so David gets anointed. The word for anoint, let's see if I can think of this. I'm gonna have to come back to it. So he gets anointed, and then he is going to, then the big old David and Goliath thing comes up. That's chapter 17. If you want to memorize like some landmark places, so that you can find your spot, and before, if you know the order of your stories a little bit, you can kind of figure out where you are. 1 Samuel 17 is David and Goliath. 17, I don't know why, I remember 17 real easy, but, so 17 is David and Goliath. And that's, you would have thought Saul was the tallest Israelite in the nation. He was a shoulder, head and shoulder above the average guy. So however tall the average Israelite was, and I don't know that they were real tall, but Saul's shoulders hit the top of their head. So he is one tall guy, big, and he has all the best armor, and yet he will not fight Goliath. But David, who isn't even of conscripting age yet for the army, did. So there was, and he didn't do it. So there's when they say he's a man after God's own heart. As a matter of fact, that verse that says he was a man after God's own heart is stated before David's name is even written in the Bible. That God knows there's this man after his own heart, and it comes up before.
So it's like the prophecy, you mean?
Yeah, it's like there's a, like Samuel goes and says that I'm going after a man after God's own heart. And then the very next chapter is about David getting anointed. So it's really cool. Okay, so David gets employed at Saul's palace, and he sings for him and worships for him. And I think a lot of the Psalms, maybe if he hadn't written the Psalms, it's where he gets his introduction into singing and writing and all that. He gets to practice all these Psalms. That's a good idea there. And then he has this big friendship with Jonathan. There's this one part where it says that Jonathan gave his robe and his sword and his shield and his armor to David. He's actually passing on the crown prince clothing imaging to David. So here is Jonathan, the crown prince, taking off his robe, putting it on David, giving him his armor. He is officially making David the crown prince. Can you imagine? I can't wait to meet Jonathan. He's just a man of, and at the same time, when it comes down to going to battle, he stays faithful to his dad, but he does not chase after David. And when it comes down to dying in battle, he dies faithful to his dad. There's just so much integrity in Jonathan. It's just an amazing thing. So we're there, and then of course things get worse, and David marries Jonathan's daughter, Michal. He gives her Michal so that she will be a snare to him. To Saul's daughter, excuse me, wrong person. He gives her Michal, it says, so that she will be a snare to him. So so Saul already knows that Michal's a little bit difficult. And David ends up being on the run. At one point, he has to split and goes up to Nob, and he actually deceives the priest there and gets the bread. You guys know that story? And it's not the bread he's supposed to eat. It's given to him anyway. He tells he's got a whole troop with him. I don't think he's got a whole troop with him. I think this is all a deception. And he gets the bread, and he splits, and he's on the run from Saul. He actually tells the priest, I'm on a mission from Saul. And he's not on a mission from Saul. Well, there's this guy named Doeg the Edomite. Anybody ever heard of Doeg the Edomite? Doeg the Edomite is one of Saul's spies, and he sees the whole thing happen, and he tells Saul that Ahimelech, the high priest, gave the bread to David, and within 3 or 4 chapters, Saul comes in and totally kills all the priests. There's one guy who escapes, so he wipes out all the priesthood. So it's not good to lie. But anyway, so that's what happens there. David starts collecting a bunch of mighty men, and they're actually the rabble of the place, and Saul is out to kill David. So instead of fighting the Philistines, he's fighting David, and David's on the run. And it goes back and forth like this all over the place until finally we get to the Battle of Mount Gilboa, and the Witch of Endor, and calling up Samuel from the dead, and all this, and it's like quite a Halloween story, but you don't really tell it at that time because it happens to be true. And that all happens. Well, anyway, Saul dies. He dies on Mount Gilboa. We could see Mount Gilboa, couldn't we, from where we were standing? Yeah, you could see Mount Gilboa standing up there, and Jonathan dies, and we're now starting at 2 Samuel. As of 2 Samuel is when David becomes king. Samuel has died, and David is going to become king. He's going to mourn, and he's going to, let's get on to my, he's going to be king of the south, just Judah, for about 7 years. Because these guys want to follow Ishbosheth, which is Saul's son. Now, Ishbosheth is a really wimpy leader, and Abner is his commander of his army, and Abner and Joab go at it, and eventually they kill off Ishbosheth, and the people all decide to join up. So now, after 7 years of being just king of Judah, David is now king of the whole place, and he decides he's going to conquer Jerusalem, which has been held all this time by the Jebusites. So the city of Jerusalem has never been conquered yet. And it's, so he's going to conquer that, and when he does, he brings the Ark of the Covenant into the city of the king. So it's going to be the king's city. So the throne of the royal king needs to be in the king's city. So, however, doesn't do this real well. He has the throne, he has the Ark of the Covenant put on a cart and carried in, and this poor guy named Uzzah sees it slipping because they hit a rut in the road, and he sticks out his hand to protect the ark, and he drops dead because you cannot touch that. The problem is you don't carry the ark on a cart. The Levites have to carry the ark. So everybody goes, oh, and so they leave it there for another 9 months, and then finally David and the Levites get it together, and they carry the ark in correctly into Jerusalem. I don't think the glory's there. I think, and the tabernacle by now is down in Gibeah. Remember the Gibeonites? It's down there. That's where the tabernacle is set up. I just love the way the stories do this, because if you know the backstory, you go, oh my goodness, why is the tabernacle in Gibeon? They were the water drawers and the woodcutters, remember? The people who served the tabernacle. So that's a cool little detail that they're down there. Well, goes on, the next main thing that happens is David gets established. He has a nice palace, and he says, I live in a palace, and God lives in a tent. I want to build God a house. This is a critical moment in the story. And so he goes to Nathan, I think it is, and Nathan is the prophet at the time. And you need a prophet because God talks through the prophet, remember that, the intercessor? So God talks through the prophet, and so David asks the prophet, and Nathan thinks this is a great idea, and that night God talks to Nathan. And he says, you tell David that he cannot build me a house. Do not build me a house. I will build David a house. So now the word for house is a variation of that, as in the, it's a different form of that same, it's Ba'it, Ba'it, Ba'it. Anyway, so God is saying to David, I am going to build you a dynasty. David's talking about a literal house. God is talking about the dynasty to follow. And that's in 2 Samuel chapter 7. It's also in 1 Chronicles 17. If you read the two, you will see that 2 Samuel chapter 7 says this. This is God talking. Now therefore, you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep. This is chapter 7, verse 8 in front of you. To be ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make you a great name, like the names of the great men who are on the earth. I will also appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them there, that they may live in their own place and not be disturbed again. Nor will the wicked afflict them any longer as formerly. Even from the day that I commanded the judges to be over my people Israel, I will give you rest from your enemies. The Lord also declares to you that the Lord will make a house for you. When your days are complete and when you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and with the strokes of sons of men. But my loving kindness shall not depart from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. In accordance with all these words and all this vision, so Nathan spoke to David. So this is the Davidic covenant.
Yeah.
This is the promise of the Messiah coming forever. If you read it again in 1 Chronicles chapter 17, you will see that that little part about when he commits sin, he'll be punished, is not in there. So here's the picture, because this is always like, wait a minute, if this is about Jesus, that doesn't make sense, right? So it has both a near and far fulfillment. Or it's like present and not yet. Have you heard any of those comparisons? There's a now and not yet, and there's a near and a far. So the near refers to Solomon and the kings, the actual kings that come down. The far refers to Jesus. And parts of it are about this one, and parts of it are about this. Solomon really will build God a house. And they will go down, and when Solomon sins, he will get disciplined. But it is this one's house who will be established forever. So that's how you take that. The exact same thing happens with the context of the virgin birth in Isaiah, because it has someone who is born right then and someone who hasn't been born yet. Okay, so there's that, and the virgin birth is not a technical virgin birth in that one. It is a man who marries a virgin and gets a child, and that's what it's called. So there's always a near and a far, and as we get into the prophets, there's almost always a near and a far thing. Like I've been recently reminded, if this is if someone's standing up here and they're looking out, they see a hilltop right here, And they see a hilltop right here, and it looks like it's the same story. And they don't see this in between. That's why you can go to almost any passage about the first Advent and think, and go jump right to the second Advent, and you would think that the two are happening. It's like that. Because it's like a mountaintop look, and they don't see the valley in between. So even when Jesus is in Nazareth and he steps up in the synagogue and he gives his statement and he quotes from Isaiah and he tells that story, he quits one line before the end of that verse. Because the last line of that verse that he says, you can look, this is in Luke chapter 4, I think. And the last line of that verse is second Advent. He goes, today this is fulfilled in your presence. And he doesn't say the last line. Because that wasn't today, this was fulfilled in your presence. So this is like a near and far thing. This happens all over the place. So anyway, I've been asked that question several times. If this is about Jesus, how come it says that? So this is my best answer for that. Otherwise, maybe someone smarter can give you a better answer for that. But, so, it's the establishment of the covenant. When he comes into us, when Jesus sets up his reign, he does not need, see, they're looking for, you go to even the New Testament. They know Jesus is going to be king, right? He's going to be Messiah, right? He's going to come in with a mighty army, right? He's going to conquer the nations and that's not what he does. So they reject him because he's not doing the picture of the king. And but when he does come, he will come with a mighty army, and he will have just one wife. He will have one bride, and that's us. And because that bride is from all the nations, all the reason for all the wives was to make treaties with all the nations. That will be illegal to do that. And of course, money won't be an issue. So you can see he's the promised king, and that's the Davidic covenant. So I'm going to give you a quick line of the covenants. There's the
We need a better plan.
Noah's covenant actually redeemed the earth and mankind as a whole, right? He actually rescued mankind from mankind, rescued us from evil, and got us out. So here's the plan to redeem all of mankind. We take it to Abraham, and we have a family, a land, and a blessing to all people. I keep thinking about this because people of the earth do not think that Israel is a blessing to all the people, and yet they are. So now we're going, I haven't thought, God, why didn't you just do it? Why are you including us, including humanity, into the layout of the plan? Because he could just do it. But he lets us be part of this plan. And how does he show redemption through this? He shows it through sacrifice. I think that's Isaac, the picture of Isaac. That's your how. He's going to take it to Moses, and he's going to take this family, land, and blessing that he is redeeming, because this is a picture of redemption. He's going to take it to a nation. He's going to show them how to run this nation with God as their king. Because it's a theocracy. It's going to stay a theocracy. I mean, we call it a monarchy when we get to Saul and David, but in reality, it's still a theocracy with David ruling under God. Okay? So now we have a nation and we have rules of government. And how does God show that He is going to rescue and redeem this way? He does it through Passover, which requires sacrifice. He does it through the Red Sea. Remember how many times they mention the Red Sea? Like every single other page? Which is rescue from slavery. He's redeeming our picture. So you see the story of the covenants. He gets to David, and he is going to set up this kingdom with God ruling on earth. Which takes us back to Adam and Eve. So this is the story. How do the different covenants create the story of redemption? So we are now here. This is all in promise mode. It hasn't happened yet. Hasn't even happened yet. But we are going to have God as Jesus Christ ruling on earth, and we will now have God living here, having redeemed the story. So that's how the covenants go. There's one more piece to this covenant, and because humans aren't involved. See, we kind of throw a wrench into God's plan. So just because we are humans with sin natures. Thank you, Adam and Eve. Now, if it hadn't been Adam and Eve, it would have been me.
Exactly.
I'm just saying, you all would have yelled at me and blamed me, it would have been me. We sort of throw a wrench into all these. Why do we need sacrifice? Because we have messed it up, right? Why do we need to be rescued from slavery? Because we're slaves to sin, right? And half the time we do it because we're born that way and then we want to stay that way. Because you want to do what you want to do. And we need God ruling here with us. So this is how the story goes. So there's one more covenant to come. And that's coming. It's going to be given in promise to Jeremiah. That one solves this. So when we get to the fifth covenant, which is right before God takes them into exile. Anytime you need hope, right then. That will be the last piece. And that will be fulfilled in Jesus Christ. That's the new covenant. And I like to, when I present anything like that to the kids, I like to call it the covenant of the heart. Because this is when He actually fixes us from the inside out. So, that's kind of the story of this. The rest of 2 Samuel is all of David's battles that he ends up, by the end of his reign, he ends up getting all the land that was promised to Abraham. From the Euphrates River down to the river of the Egyptians. And he doesn't have, I mean, there's not 100% control over it, but he has dominion over the whole thing. So by the end of David's reign, that goes away real quickly and will have to be restored by the real king coming, but he does have that. And there's a lot of things that go on. The very next time Satan is mentioned is, last time Satan was mentioned was in Job. We had it in the Garden of Eden, we had it in Job, and we're going to have it with David. That he gets mentioned because Satan motivates him to do something that doesn't seem all that innocuous to us. And yet, I'll have to pick up there, but there's, the end of that story is interesting and it has to do with the glory. So, and we will have to pick up there. If you want to know what the rest of 1 Chronicles is on, Oh, I didn't spell that right. Oh, yes, maybe I did. I don't know. It's David's plans for the temple. There's a lot of David's plans for the temple in there, what he's going to do, what he set Solomon up for. So you could see David's heart is incredibly to do what he could for God. Obey God in every single way. Can I give enough to God? What David gives to God is huge. If we could evaluate it in American terms, the value of the animals and the gold and the silver, probably millions of dollars, is what David gives and sets aside for Solomon to build God's temple. That is how much David did not keep the money for himself, which I think is really cool. So, unfortunately, he did marry too many wives. He had sons. There was a rebellion. He was a revolution in his nation. There's all kinds of things that happened we're going to have to skip over. I'm sorry, I hate doing that. But we're going to pick up with Solomon next time. Dear Father in heaven, I have raced through your story, and part of me knows I need to just give the overview, and part of me feels so terrible that I've raced through your story, and it's a beautiful story with all of its parts, and I thank you for each of them. I thank you that you, in your great compassion and love, let the story that you're working out weave through humanity, weave through the Israelite people, and weave down to us, and let us be included in it. And I ask that you just open our eyes and help us to get a better view of how the entire Old Testament just sets up Jesus Christ so perfectly. In Jesus' name, amen.